everybody, welcome back to Law Hero. My name is Jen and I make videos about the law. And at this time of year, a lot of people are applying for internships and they're coming to me for help with their CV, for example. So we're going to talk about a few different things here. We're going to talk about a little bit about CV and a little bit about the interview, because I have basically 3 tips around these 3 areas. So when it comes to CV, do you know that people spend on average 7.4 seconds looking at a CV? And that means you have very little time to impress upon a reader who you are and, you know, that you're capable of doing this job. So I always say, especially if you're starting out in your career, keep your CV to 1 page if possible, 2 pages if you've done a lot. I myself, my CV is 3 pages, but if I was trying to really impress, I would get it down to 2 pages. It's kind of counterintuitive, but the less you have there actually is the better. What you're looking for in terms of substance is quality over quantity. So there are some tips about preparing a CV, and 2 of the more overlooked areas is color and picture. I always ask my trainees or my interns to add a picture. It just personalizes and brings a kind of social element to a very bland document. There is also no rules around putting a picture up there. So I say, why not, and take the competitive advantage. It is certainly not unprofessional to put a picture in there. I actually think it's highly professional to put a name to a face. And then the other area as well is around color. So in my CV is always blue and I always have the same font. And if I'm applying by way of cover letter, it will have the same font. And that just comes down to branding and marketing. That's your own personal preference, but it actually really makes a difference in the eye of the reader to have some consistency. The next big area would be around like your formatting, and then having consistency in how you use your language. So for example, don't use passive, use past tense when you're talking about past experience, and use active tense when you're talking about what you're doing right now. And I would say the final tip I would give around CVs is never add extraneous detail. The extraneous detail will come out in the interview if the employer wants it to. So the next area we're going to move on to is when you're asked some of the more soft skill questions in an interview. Usually, and I say this to my trainees all the time, these questions are not around competency, they're around ethics and what your character is. It's a way for the employer to deduce what type of a person you are. And one really easy way to deduce what type of a person you're dealing with is asking them about weaknesses, because of course nobody wants to talk about their weaknesses, everybody wants to talk about their strength. And one question I get asked a lot is, how do I answer that question? And my answer to that is always honestly. So for example, when I talk about myself in terms of weaknesses, I say that sometimes I can be a little bit quick, or I can be a little bit like haphazard, in that I don't take the time sometimes to consider things. And a lot of people be like, oh, you can't say that because, you know, you're interviewing to be a lawyer. But I think it's far more impressive to have self-awareness around your weaknesses. And indeed, that's what employers look for. They look for somebody with a high level of EQ around their weaknesses, so you can work on those. If you have a blind spot, that's far more difficult to manage. So I would say be very honest about your weaknesses are. Don't over egg it, just keep it brief. Be honest, be self-aware about it, and honestly you will fly through that question. It's not a trick question, it's basically just to see how you handle it. And then the last kind of common question I see that comes up a lot is, why do you want this role? And in my opinion, this is the single most important question in the interview, because what you're essentially doing here is marrying yourself to the job and showing how all of the job specification matches up to who you are, and it's your job as a candidate to bring those together in answering this question. So I would say there's about 3 things you need to fulfill when answering this question. So it is, look at it from the employer's point of view. How do you match the employer's expectation? The second part would be something personal about you. So whether it's your specific skill or your interest or your passion, how that's almost like the glue that holds you and the employer together, because you need some sort of something more than just matching the job spec and competency. And then I would say the third part is that you actually admit, well, I just really like this specification. I think it would allow me to develop my skills further. I think if it is a different industry, or, if it's something new that you're looking forward to a new challenge, that it's time for a change. It's time for a change of scene, to meet new colleagues, to be in a different organization, that there's no point making it up. You're like, I just want something new, and there's actually no shame in saying that. So and especially if you come from a different industry, or you come from a non-law background, that can be very endearing, and it's also very realistic and understandable to an employer. So I hope those tips help you, and I'll see you in the next one.